Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I welcome you once again this evening on another edition of Wednesday Night with myself, Inayet Wadee. We welcome our listeners, our viewers on the various platforms of Salam Media this evening. And once again, a panel discussion. And I must say tonight is going to be quite an interesting discussion. In fact, there are two issues that we will be talking about. And firstly, we're going to be talking about the South African Zionist Terrorism Corridor Probe. Now, this is a comprehensive criminal docket which is based on sustainable and irrefutable evidence which has been submitted to the South African Police Services and the National Director of Public Prosecutions. Now, for a very, very long time, there has been this huge concern as far as South Africa is concerned, and particularly South African Jews who are serving in the Israeli Defense Force. And this has been a major sticky point, and also looking at South Africa in terms of its international obligations, and also as far as human rights law is concerned. And this is the reason why we are having the discussion in the first hour of the show this evening. And we have got with us a panel, and this docket was actually launched today. And we have with us on the panel, we've got human rights attorney and lawfare activist. We've got Ziyaad Patel, we've got Safoudien Bester, the Palestine Solidarity Campaign in Cape Town, and also Paul Handler, who has been a Palestinian activist and also with the PSC in Cape Town. And just looking on my screen, we have assembled the panel. Firstly, Attorney Ziyaad Patel. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome.
Wa alaikum assalam, and shukran jazilan, Inayet, for hosting me on your show. And I'm sure we're going to have a very good discussion about these developments.
Certainly, and also with the PSC, Paul Handler, welcome to the show. We appreciate your time with us this evening.
Yes, I'm very happy to be here, and thank you, Inayet, for having me on, and good evening to all your viewers.
Yes, and also to Safoudien Bester, if you could just unmute your mic, please, Safoudien. Assalamu alaikum, and welcome to you as well.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to you, Inayet, and your viewers. Shukran for inviting me.
Yes, Ziyaad, I'm going to start off with you now. In fact, I've actually seen an article already appearing in the Middle East Monitor today. So obviously the launch today, or the launch of this probe, has already made international news. And just to understand this docket that we're talking about, the South African Zionist Terrorism Corridor Probe, just some background to the docket and to the launch that took place earlier today.
Certainly. So to put your viewers into perspective, the probe or the criminal docket was lodged with the relevant investigative and prosecutorial authorities already on the 24th of February 2022. The reason that we have kept the probe outside of the media domain was there was a moratorium on the lodgement. Firstly, so that the South African Police Services would have the chance to look at the probe. It's quite an extensive document, about 300 pages in total, with a substantial founding affidavit by the principal complainant, Mr. Safoudien Bester. So it's been under moratorium, and the decision was made by the team that has put this together to release it to the media, which was then planned for today. As you are aware, that this also coincides with Israeli Apartheid Week, and this would certainly bolster the Palestinian Solidarity Advocacy Campaign in South Africa and internationally. On the point of it already making headlines internationally, I am aware that there's already been some op-eds been written by the complainant, the Media Radio Network, Mr. Iqbal Jasab, and that has appeared already. And there will be quite a substantial interest in this criminal probe, which is long outstanding, extremely long outstanding. As I've been in media interviews almost the entire day, I've said that one of the principal objectives of this probe was challenging the narrative in mainstream media, which exists, whereby only certain groups and racial classification of people and religious groups of people are classified to be terrorists when they support lawful resistance against occupation, which of course is a right of self-defense recognized in international law. And the Zionist lobby in this country has been going on way too long, been able to perpetrate these kinds of abhorrent acts. When I talk of the Zionist lobby, I talk about the financiers, the recruiters, the enablers that creates the environment within which young, impressionable male and female South African Jews, thinking that it's their religious duty and are honored, go and serve in the IDF, of course, perpetrating war crimes, crimes against humanity, and also being involved in terror-related activities. We can more about that, but certainly, Inayet, this is a huge case that we have put together over many months, and in fact, the team that's worked on this case, on same or similar other cases, decided to put this particular case in the public domain. There's also an extensive executive summary, and in the executive summary, we will list the accused. In that executive summary, we state that it's in public interest and in safety and security, because remember that these, to explain to your viewers, these are trained mercenaries and lone soldiers that serve in the IDF for private gain or to get some kind of benefit. To get some kind of benefit by serving in the IDF in terms of bursaries, education funds, accommodation, and so forth. And the Israeli Defense Force and the Israeli authorities use this carrot stick to, to invite and to put before South Africans and others across other national jurisdictions these kind of incentives to join the IDF. But of course, that is illegal under international law. It's illegal in terms of the statutes and the legislation that we have in this country. And we can go into that in depth in this program as well. Thank you.
Yes, Ziyaad, we certainly will go in depth, and I've had an insight into the executive summary. And, as you mentioned, this is a huge docket, and obviously the summary just highlights some of the key issues that we are going to be unpacking tonight. And I just want to bring Safoudien Bester into the discussion because, as you mentioned, Ziyaad, he is Safoudien, you are the principal complainant as a South African citizen, together with people like Martin Jensen, and also at the same time looking at organizations like the PSC Palestine Solidarity Campaign Cape Town and the Media Review Network, and just looking at your involvement as far as being the principal complainant goes, Safoudien.
Yes, Brother Inayet. Although I'm the principal complainant, I have to say that this team, our legal team headed by Ziyaad, Paul Hendler, who's the coordinator, the Media Review Network, I think together we have worked, with our humble and, with limited resources, we have worked together to put this. So somebody had to be the principal complainant. Look like the evidence was very evident and clear on social media. These youngsters that are, illegally serving in a foreign army and an oppressive apartheid army at that, they were not very careful. They were very brazen and open on social media. as it is today. And it wasn't difficult, to get the evidence, although it took a lot of effort to articulate it and to put it into the form in which Ziyaad has put it and to present it to the NPA and to the authorities. So yes, I think equally all of us, in the FMAA group that did this project, I think we equally carried the risks as well as the costs, as well as the effort. And kudos to all of us. And I think, when it is new, it just came out today in public, but we'll see it from tomorrow onwards. And we were still waiting for the reaction, of the Zionist lobby. And I think then we have the resolve to face this, because our objective is very clear. Our objective is we want and demand these people to be arrested, the case to be investigated, for them to be arrested, trialed, and they must be sentenced to the full extent of the law. We didn't do this for a headline or, in the Middle East or so, but we want the results. We want to strike the fear of the law into these criminals, so that even if one example can be made, that they can be discouraged from serving the Israeli army, then I think that would be a great victory in our gift from South Africa to the Palestinian people.
Yes, and just to bring Paul into the discussion, and Paul, what is important to understand is there is, as Safoudien mentioned, there has been a lot of time, been a lot of effort, there's been a fair amount of resources that have gone into this probe and the composition of the SA Zionist Terrorism Corridor probe. But just to understand the amount of work and also in terms of the composition of this probe, and just looking at some of the key issues, some of the salient issues that one needs to take cognizance of, Paul. Paul, if you could just unmute your mic. Okay, there we go.
Okay, sorry. In terms of the effort, this team has been working on this for about 5 years now. Although the issue arose probably in 2014, if I'm correct, around at the time of Operation Protective Edge against the genocidal attack against Gaza. It's been a joint sort of PSC Cape Town media review network from very early on. So I think it's been a very good example, of pooling limited resources of people who have the values and the commitments, for Palestine solidarity. It's been something that only a few of us individuals have worked on, and our legal sort of services from Ziyaad have been critical, for the whole process over the years of this project, and we've recorded our process quite meticulously. I think we've done in-depth research. I think there's been a lot of in-depth discussion of the legal issues, certainly, but also the broader political issues around this process. And then, of course, the involvement of institutions, of Zionist supporting institutions, critical institutions that have created a framework for persistent recruitment, which I think because it's violating laws, in our view, you could call racketeering. So I think there's been quite a lot of research, all on public domain available information, that shows the extent of institutional process that quite consciously intended to reach out globally to volunteers called lone soldiers. And we can talk more about some of the details of who these institutions are and how this whole thing is motivated, and in particular, what we picked up about the process with regard to South African lone soldiers who've been recruited and have gone over and fought in the IDF, and who indicated that they were even in one case involved in Operation Protective Edge. From previous sort of legal investigations, as well as online public information, we've managed to put together also that process of recruitment and how it actually happens.
Yes, thank you for that, Paul. And just to bring Ziyaad back into the discussion, and obviously we will go into some of the detail and just to understand the institutions, their modus operandi and how they operate. The key issue here, Ziyaad, is looking at it from a legal perspective as well, because we are talking about contravention of law. We're talking about contravention of regulation of the Foreign Military Assistance Act. And also when one looks at Anti-Terrorist Related Activities Act. So there's been a lot of legal thought that has gone behind this probe as well, because at the end of the day, when one is calling for criminal prosecution, one needs a case that is, for want of a better term, watertight. So I suppose, you have obviously looked at the legalities in a lot of detail, particularly in with reference to this Foreign Military Assistance Act that we're talking about.
Certainly. Being involved over the years in Palestinian solidarity advocacy, I had the opportunity of being part of the legal team in 2008, 2009, during Operation Castled. When the initial war in Gaza, that war happened in the Gaza Strip. And we had then put together the Gaza docket. I think that was from a personal perspective, that was my first experience in seeing what kind of modern day warfare can do to densely populated areas. I spoke extensively this morning about how war crimes is determined. For instance, it needs to look at two principles of distinction and proportionality. You need to make a distinction between military and civilian targets as the first step, and then all steps in a war kind of situation, not to mitigate, but to avoid all civilian casualty. That, unfortunately, is not the norm in the kind of modern-day warfare. Behind this is this global military-industrial complex that we speak about, which also is the enablers of Israel's modern-day weaponry system. And we can make the similarities between what's going on in Ukraine, as we see just within a few weeks, cities of Kiev, Kharkiv, Mariupol being destroyed. I think we're getting to Kiev, but that's the reality, that human beings have developed modern warfare technology to the extent that entire cities can be decimated at huge cost to human health, to the environment, and of course to the common planet that we live on. And that would probably be my passion for the kind of work I do, so that our children would be able to see a better future with peace, safety, and security. Understanding it in that context of what Operation Cast led, I worked on that docket, and then having represented Khadija Davids in 2010, when she was aboard the Mavi Mamra, that again was an international heist and kidnapping of a South African citizen in international waters, when the Freedom Flotilla aid mission was diverted to the port of Ashdod. And that was a humanitarian aid vessel that was destined to go to Gaza due to the recent war that had happened, where, as we are aware, that Gaza was under occupation and siege and so forth. And over the years, I've had the opportunity of working and making submissions to the United Nations Human Rights Council in Geneva in relation to Palestinian political rights, prisoners' rights, and from the perspective of how Palestinian prisoners are being treated and tortured. So, like the crime of apartheid, so is torture constituting a crime against humanity. Having been able to be involved in these different various legal processes and criminal complaints, we've been quite aware that South Africa has a certain body of laws, and we need to distinguish here between what is our common law when it deals with these kinds of crimes of aggression and egregious crimes against humanity, that the common law imposes upon us, and is a Latin term for this, known as hostis humani generis. These aggressors become the enemy of all humankind. Hence, it must go across jurisdictions to arrest these individuals that perpetrate these crimes against humanity, and they must be tried and be held accountable. In the context of that, South Africa has legislation. We became party to the Rome Statute. Of course, our post-democratic order imposed upon us that we become part of the global community of nations, that we no longer be excluded, we no longer be that pariah state that we once were. And of course, we've come out of apartheid, and we've signed these resolutions and international bodies of laws into our law. So principally on war crimes and crimes against humanity, and crimes of torture and so forth, we've got the International Criminal Court Act that we've domesticated. Together with that, we've got the Regulation of Foreign Military Assistance Act. This act was supposed to be repealed. In fact, there is a new piece of legislation out which deals with the prohibition of mercenary activities. However, due to regulations not having been passed, we still have the reliance on the Regulation of Foreign Military Assistance Act. And this is within the context of our constitutional democracy and us interpreting international law consistent with our constitution. Our constitution imposes upon us to interpret international law consistent with our constitution and our constitutional obligations and international obligations, unless there's a disparity. So, and we have customary law, which is where we have universal jurisdiction that deals with this kinds of crimes where there's hostis humanis generis, and there's an exception in terms of its interpretation constitutionally. Also, based on these bodies of laws, we have the implementation of the we have the Implementation and Protection of Palestinian Solidarity Rights Act. This is an advocacy bill which I have drafted a while back, and this explains trying to advance Palestinian solidarity rights, particularly because of the situation that Palestinians find themselves, and trying to create the political influence and the political leverage to have specific Palestinian legislation passed because of the similarity between the struggle of apartheid South Africa and Palestine. So we have that, and that continues to be an advocacy bill that deals with some of the critical issues. For instance, how Home Affairs through a cooperative governance would deal with persons that want to go through Department of Home Affairs through immigration to serve in the IDF, because of course we want to isolate that kind of activity. Importantly, we've looked at then the POCTATARA, which is the Protection of Constitutional Democracy Against Terror-Related Activities, and that's the crux of the legal case that we've put together here. After having looked at all the evidence, and Safoudien explains it nicely to say that it was on social media and it was brazen, where they are proud to serve in the IDF. They feel that it is their religious duty. They are supported by their friends and their family, and in fact, their versions are corroborated and supported by family members. In fact, there was there's evidence of one particular suspect or accused surprising his parents after serving in the IDF and coming back to South Africa to surprise them. There's another, we've got video footage and images of evidence of a family going to occupied Palestine to the IDF to surprise their daughter, a family from South Africa. And this is treated as normal and not having broken any laws. And we've identified these accused suspects to have served in the war that happened last year in Gaza in May, the 2014 war, the 2012 war, and possibly 2008, 2009, and maybe even previously in the war with South Lebanon. So they've clearly been recruited, they've clearly been enabled, and there's an entire system structure in the way this recruitment happens through the lone soldier program, and where they also act as mercenaries. And tying that up to the South African Zionist Federation and the South African Zionist Federation of Israel, TELFED, which openly deals with the recruitment of lone soldiers. The South African Zionist Federation forms part of the World Zionist Organization. And the Jewish National Fund, and I'll get to this because this is also crucial to what we're discussing. The Jewish National Fund has been involved in some kind of a property money laundering scheme where we know that there's absenteeism laws in place. We know that in towns and neighborhoods of East Jerusalem, Sheikh Jarrah, Silwan, and other areas, there's an absenteeism law where Palestinians have been ethnically cleansed or been forced out of their homes, and through this process of removing them from their homes, they apply the absenteeism law, or through very questionable standards create a sale or purchase agreement where these funds are then collected from South African Jews in South Africa and elsewhere that contribute to the purchase of this land, which under international law is protected. United Nations Resolution 2334 says that there must be an immediate cease of settlement expansions. UN Rapporteur Michael Links speaks about how these settlements have changed the facts on the ground, supports the findings by Virginia Tilly and others about how secular colonialism is expanding in these areas on Palestinian land, which is unlawful. And in fact, the UN Rapporteur states that this is constituting a war crime. And that's how we implicate the Jewish National Fund, where the land is then purchased and sold to KKL Israel, and then subsequently repurchased to another subsidiary called Hinuta, and they sort of money launder these property sales. And hence we've also added in the Prevention of Organized Crime Act, part and parcel of the anti-terrorism related activities. And that's the complicity in terms of the Jewish National Fund, the Zionist Federation, and TELFED, who's also involved in the recruitment of these Zionist soldiers. Now, Inayet, just to take a moment here, this is important, this is crucial, because this is of significance to the security of the South African state and to our sovereignty, because it comes back to the question about narratives. And I mentioned this earlier, that the narrative that a person that supports a resistance movement or looks different than yourself is classified a terrorist. But in fact, these are individuals that are highly trained. In fact, the evidence speaks about some of them involved in combat training, others in paratrooping, others involved in medics, others involved in IDF communications, in combat. Most of them are involved in combat. And we tie up these South African nationals, and not only to the perpetration of war crimes, crimes against humanity, and for instance, even in the fact-finding mission reports, the UN reports speak about this kind of collective punishment against the people of Gaza, but also terrorizing the Palestinian population. And this terrorizing of the Palestinian population extends to not only the Gaza Strip. For instance, if you can recall, there was a particular South African national, a lot was spoken about him being killed in the West Bank, David Kay, last year sometime. And there was a huge outcry about Palestinian fighters having murdered him. But in fact, he was acting as a mercenary, unlawfully violating the laws of this country. And where was David Kay serving? He wasn't serving in Gaza when he was killed. He was serving in the occupied Palestinian territories in the West Bank. And those areas They continue to systematically oppress Palestinians and remove all of their rights, strip them of all their fundamental human rights, like anyone, and fundamental human rights should accrue to all of us, to all of humanity. So this is how that system is being supported and sustained, and that's the extent and the comprehensiveness of the criminal complaint that we put together. And there's many analogies. There's substantial evidence on all 13 suspects. My view is that we don't have only a prima facie case on the face of it, but we have a reasonable case for successful prosecution in relation to the Regulation of Foreign Military Assistance Act. But we're also challenging and asking our authorities to look at the protection of constitutional democracy against terror-related activities in how the Zionist institutions are set up and how they set up subsidiaries and other groups to be able to create this enabling structure within which South Africans are unlawfully going and serving in the IDF. I just want to mention that the Anti-Terrorist Related Activities Act is applicable, together with the Prevention of Organized Crime, also in respect of property that is either owned or controlled by or on behalf of an entity involved in terrorist-related activities, and that's taken from the legislation. So we'll leave it there for now, and we can continue as
yes.
asked me.
Yes, shukran for that, Ziyaad. Just Safoudien. Safoudien, when one looks at the Palestine solidarity movements in South Africa, and for a very, very long time, they've been talking to the likes of government, giving them a wake-up call, highlighting what Ziyaad has been talking about and what this probe is about. And at this point in time, the key issue here is South Africa, the government, the authorities need to take this probe very, very seriously, because the key issue here is as Ziyaad mentioned, there are issues surrounding national security, but also in terms of its international obligations. Ziyaad alluded to things like, the global military industrial complex, and when one looks at how their regional security is compromised as well, but also at the same time propping up despots, popping up people like the current leadership, the Zionist leadership within Israel, to act with impunity, to do whatever they have to. So, the South African government needs to take this matter seriously, because we've seen one or two cases. We've seen the case of the Tulsi twins. We've even seen the Zionist Federation and the Jewish Board of Deputies issue certain statements with regard to the Tulsi twins. But here we have it, and this has been going on for a very, very long time, where they are recruited, they are killing innocent Palestinian people.
Yes, Inayet, you make very valid points there. I think the first obligation government has is the obligation towards the citizens of this country, right? So you mentioned the Tulsi twins, you also mentioned, look, we can remember how the authorities used to take people off planes when they intended to join ISIS. There was a lot of resources and intelligence and wiretapping to potential ISIS supporters who take them on planes. But when David K and these South African mercenaries, criminals, when they get killed, our foreign relations department, Turco, they send messages of condolences to these criminals. In 2006, when Ehud Goldwasser, a South African citizen, was captured by the Hezbollah on the border, on occupied Lebanese land in the Sheba farms, there was no condemnation. In fact, the South African government is quick to give condolences, to these criminals. So we can see the double standards. There's no, we are not equal under the law. I think the NPA and the authorities, like I said in my speech, I said that they have a golden opportunity in this particular South African Zionist terrorism probe, for them to restore the confidence you know, of the South African people in our authorities, how they should, deal with this. And I think all of us, and that is the purpose of this publicity campaign, is so that we should hold government to account, and say, look, yes, you have an obligation towards the international community to say, but to the people first. These are trained killers. They are trained. They are walking on our streets. Myself and the team and all, we need to speak about these things. There are certain risks towards us. I can remember in 2014 when I made the first case. Then the Hawks, at that time it was still the Hawks, and they phoned me. They said to me, "Look, this is something new you're doing." And they spoke to me about the investigating officer. He spoke to me about Mossad sleeping cells that are in this country, And he says I must look out in my street if there's cars I don't recognize, and then I must, contact. I said, look, we know these are trained killers. Our authorities knows about them. We take the risk. They should investigate these people and prosecute them. But it's been many years, and I think this campaign that has started today in the public, I think we must maintain and follow up and pressure them, as the media, I hope, is doing now, questioning the NPA. They should come to the party, and they should, otherwise the alternative is that we will be another banana republic, another country in Africa with corrupt government that are controlled by corporations, and that's the alternative. So we will keep an eye on this.
Yes, and just to bring Paul back into the discussion, and Paul, I just want to talk about the institutions that are implicated in the probe. And having had a look at this executive summary, there's quite an interesting graphic that is contained in the executive summary talking about the entire process, from the time you're looking at a prospective volunteer until the point in time when the person is recruited by the IDF. And this is very, very important or interesting for us to actually understand this process, because there are a number of institutions that have been that are being made mention in this probe as well. One of them being CALFID, also known as the Zionist Federation of South Africa, Israel.
Yes, Inayet. Before I do that, I wonder if I could just give you a quick view of the global institutional structure, because this volunteering to the IDF, the so-called lone soldier phenomenon, has a long history. Okay, it actually precedes the formation of the state, and they constituted an organization called Machal in 1948 when the state was formed, and Telfed appears to have played a critical role in that constitution. So the South African connection is quite strong historically, but at various times over the decades, you had other structures coming in. So there's a structure called Friends of the IDF from North America, USA, founded in 1981. SAREL is a strong recruiting structure for volunteers aimed at the global sort of market, if you like. Formed in 82, another organization called Tsofim Garin Tsaba, also aimed globally, formed in 1991. And then more recently in 2001, another organization called Nefesh Be Nefesh, which focuses on the USA and Canada. And the Canadian country or example is quite interesting, because we are aware through colleagues in Canada of a very strong recruitment to IDF process that's been established there. But within that historical context, and just before looking at the particular structures and process that we came across in South Africa, I want to refer to Machal that I mentioned earlier, who actually have included in great detail categories of volunteers. And interestingly, they distinguish between religious volunteers and, people who are not religious. You would have to be Jewish to qualify to be a volunteer, okay? And I should just add as an aside, but an important contextual aside, that it's estimated that the lone soldiers produce about 6,000, people in arms or supporters of people in arms for the IDF, which is about 5% of the estimated 125,000 manpower needs of the IDF currently. So the question around the motivation for this incredible effort that is put in is quite an interesting question. And I think there's a very strong ideological motivation. You can read on some of these sites the characterization as Israel as the democratic bastion against what they call Islamofascism. I think we're familiar with that narrative, but clearly we're involved in an ideological struggle here also. And that is a clear motivation. And at some point, it appears in the early 80s when the Friends of the IDF and SARL were formed, that there were manpower problems. And it was at the time of the first invasion of Lebanon, you'll realize, where there was long lines of logistics, and you pick up from readings that there periodically are these manpower problems. So 5% plays a far more important ideological role and sometimes a manpower gap filler than we are aware of. But having said that, if we look at the IDF recruitment process, and I want to point out an important precursor before we even get to the process, okay? And that is the visits that are paid to Israel. Youth in school at teenage level in Jewish schools all over the world, and certainly in South Africa, go on visits to Israel. They go on holiday there. They go on a course there, and it appears that the ideology and the having of fun, is quite an important cementing of them into becoming, some of them, not all of them, I think it's maybe a minority, to becoming lone soldiers. And I will just read you a short sort of quote from an article that explains this. The article later notes that in Israel, movement-sanctioned trips routinely include 4 days of Gadna, a paramilitary training course in a desert camp. The teenagers are organized into brigades with names of real IDF units, learn IDF slang, and fire semi-automatic weapons. Quote, I got to wear an actual helmet and we ran around the desert, hiding, using our surroundings, learning different stances and so on, unquote, reported one US student in an online testimonial. Quote, it was very cool to feel like a soldier. So, I think before the recruitment process even starts, there are these visits going on and things happening that lay like a strong ground, for cementing more impressionable minds into this identity, creating this identity of defense of the nation against and democracy against Islamofascism. To answer your question about the actual recruitment process that we've come across in South Africa, and all the points I'm going to make now are publicly available. They're online, and we will have hyperlinks to them unless the organizations decide to take them down. But there are sort of screenshots of these places. But you mentioned SARL, okay, which I've mentioned earlier, goes back to the early 80s. SARL has offices in Joburg, Durban, Cape Town, Port Elizabeth, and Pretoria. And the contact people and their contact emails and mobile landline numbers are actually all available, and they are a very important route for applying to volunteer, and they have an office in Israel, of course, quite a major office. So that's how you would go. That's one route you could go. Okay, you could also you could walk into these offices, but you could also go into an online application directly to SARL, which possibly happens far more now with post-lockdown conditions and what have you. And then you can also apply directly through Telfed on a URL, all these applications are then based on information that you've already got beforehand. It gives you a bit of a guide, okay? Like Machal that I mentioned earlier has a volunteer guide, about the procedures and the processes that you go through. Lonesoldier.com is quite an important website for just getting more information before you decide to make the application or decide to make your move. And then the Israel Center, which I think is based in Cape Town, has a URL that disseminates information also. So this sets the whole thing up. And depending on which route you then go for, the IDF will eventually get these applications from these three different organizational routes, and they will make a decision, and then you are formally recruited, and that decision will be approved online to you, and then you basically have to go on a travel route. Okay, now the travel route, and we've learned this obviously, I think, from previous legal professionals who've worked on the earlier Gaza docket that Ziyaad referred to, and other related investigations. You can't find this online because they go to a third country. I think Ziyaad may have mentioned this earlier, on an SA passport, and then get an Israeli passport, presumably issued at the embassy, or a temporary document, and then they go into Israel on that passport. Okay, and if they're coming back, they're entering South Africa on a South African passport that only shows that they went to the UK or whatever. So that's basically what we know at this stage about the travel route. Look, this is research that is still in process, but it's quite advanced, and it's quite substantial, and it's going to be sort of rounded off in the near future, and probably added to, as we investigate further and we get a more enriched picture of the institutions and the actual processes and the ideologies that they use to, the worldviews in place that drive people into these things. And I think we have an ideological struggle here, clearly, as part of this whole legal and political process.
Yes. Also, Ziyaad, I think what is important is, apart from just the recruitment, what has come under the radar also has been the JNF, the Jewish National Fund. And this is important for us to understand, because we know that throughout the entire world, there is this entire focus on terror funding and ISIS funding and this type of funding. But just looking at the JNF, for instance, and the report, the executive summary talks about the JNF. And when we try and understand, especially with regards to properties of Palestinians being taken away, the settlers, we know what's happening out in Jerusalem, Sheikh Jarrah and the like. And this is important because the patronage of, and this report speaks about prominent South African Jewish families and juristic persons, institutions and organizations who have been complicit for decades as far as this fund is concerned, and how this has basically contributed to forced eviction and displacement of the Palestinians from their legally owned properties.
Certainly, Inayet. I'm just trying to get to some of that information here. But I think it was high time, to use those words, that the Jewish National Fund came under scrutiny for its approach in maintaining and sustaining the apartheid Israeli occupation of Palestinian land. For too long has been the situation that the Jewish National Fund is a safe fund, giving aspirations to the Jewish people, and in that context of them having their homeland on Palestinian territory. And I think that there's quite a lot of articles being written about the Jewish National Fund. I did speak about a village in a Palestinian village named Lubia, where South African Jewish families, prominent Jewish families, would contribute to the Jewish National Fund. And this Palestinian village is in fact constitutes a settlement, which is illegal under international law, and in fact constitutes a war crime, where these settlements are then, or these Palestinian villages are destroyed or flattened, and through a greenwashing forestation program, where they then grow forests and for the benefit of colonial settlers. That is one component. One of the other important aspects is, and I think it was Abu Sita that raises it in his article, about, in fact, even African Jews. There's an article in the criminal complaint where South African Jewish families and Jewish people apologize to Palestinians for the way the Jewish National Fund has expropriated their land, and it's done in a very complex economic financial system with the Israeli government, in the way Palestinians are driven out of their land, the exodus of Palestinians, the ethnic cleansing. Jerusalem is being, in the process of the Judaization process, as we'd call it, the Judaization of Jerusalem in East Jerusalem, where Palestinian families are being put out or being forced out. And how are they being forced? They've forced out this continuous kind of, circumstance where life just becomes intolerable, where they continuously arrested, they continuously harassed, there's permits, access control, the cantonization of Palestinian neighborhoods from each other. So from one Palestinian neighborhood to another, you can't even travel. You need to go and get a pass to access through checkpoints and other difficulties, which makes it difficult for Palestinians to live there. And some are forcibly removed from these areas. And when these areas, when they are forced, then there's this kind of draconian apartheid legislation that's imposed, that distinguishes between settlers and Israeli settlers and Palestinians, where Palestinians are subject to arbitrary laws, martial law, administrative law, and then there's a different set of rules and laws and legislation for these Israeli settlers. And I was mentioning earlier, for instance, in Israel itself, there's the there's a law that distinguishes between Israelis and Israeli Arabs. I think the nation state law. And then we've got in these neighborhoods of East Jerusalem, where there's the absenteeism law which applies. So if there's no Palestinian that can claim their land or their property, that is simply then confiscated by the apartheid state or sold off in terms of the Jewish National Fund and KKL, where this is then purchased allegedly in terms of a legal transaction, and then to sort of cover the paper trail of the illegality, it is then resold to through a Himnuta program to settler colonialists, who then purchase the land allegedly lawfully. And the Jewish National Fund is directly complicit in this. And we state this in our criminal complaint because this constitutes nothing less than terror-related activities and forms part and parcel of the prevention of organized crime, where there's money laundering and this sort of laundering of property to legitimize illegal property transactions. And certainly that must come under the scrutiny, more especially because settlement expansions are unlawful. It constitutes war crimes, and it also furthers the overarching systemic oppression of Palestinians in terms of the settler, colonial, and apartheid regime that it imposes. And all of this overarching kind of activity is protected by who? The IDF, right? It's the IDF that looks after this. They are the police in all of this. They are the military occupiers that will ensure that settler colonialists continue to live in Palestinian homes and on land. And that's where the crux of our case comes in, to say that it's not only the belligerent military occupation or the war crimes that's being perpetrated in wars in Gaza, or the sustaining of apartheid in Palestinian territories, but also that these recruitees and these South African nationals and citizens that go to serve in the IDF are part and parcel complicit in terror-related activities. And that is the legal argument that we've made. It's taken us a long time, Inayet, but we've also had to wait on critical reports and findings by people like Michael Link, UN Special Rapporteur, that makes this finding about settlements constituting war crimes. And then, of course, on the backdrop of the UN Security Council Resolution 2334, and keeping also in mind Resolution 184, where it gives the right of Palestinians to the right of return to their land, that we are confident enough in terms of that overarching kind of structure. And interestingly, like if you look at the Jewish National Fund and you go and do some investigation on their principal place of business, their principal place of business is in Johannesburg, exactly where the South African Zionist Federation building is based. They run from the same premises in the same building. So these are all complicit institutions that form part of the greater Zionist plan of, coinciding, I think it's Judea and Samaria, north and south of Jerusalem and the West Bank into one. And of course, this cantonization program of sparsing Palestinian neighborhoods from each other. And in fact, like what they're doing in the Gaza Strip, is making life intolerable through this continuous siege. We're seeing it happen in Ukraine at the moment. This continuous siege on civilian cities, stifling them from food, rights of freedom, association, trade, organization, basic amenities and basic abilities to have a normal life lived with dignity, is being taken away from the people, Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, but also making it life intolerable in these occupied Palestinian territories, whereby when that happens, they're able to then pronounce in terms of claiming this land illegally and occupying it.
Yes, shukran for that, Ziyaad. I see we obviously are almost out of time. Safoudien, obviously the key issue here is justice, and justice would require the prosecution of the South Africans that have been serving in the Israeli army. Just where to from here?
Yes, like I said, we need a sustained campaign. We've launched the case against the NPA. We can't leave it there. We need to put more pressure on the NPA and the public, participation, and to put this pressure, this case can go forward. We can't give them an open-ended time as well. We need to keep the foot on the accelerator and not take it off. And they must understand our resolve. That's why today in my address, I made it firm that our objective and our target is to have prosecutions and sentencing. The evidence is irrefutable, and this must happen. And once they understand that, then I don't think there's any alternative. The alternative is a banana republic. That's as simple as that. It's either we are all equal in front of the law, or we are banana republic, and we don't want to go to that.
Sorry,
for that,
Inayet,
Paul,
if I
just
may-
in a minute, final thoughts. I'll come back to you now, Ziyaad. We'll just, in a minute, final thoughts from you, Paul.
Look, I think the institutions and the institutional process is a critical part of this case. It's not just the individuals. and it's critical to get that out into the public domain also, because that's where the ideologies that are sympathetic to Israel and its view of its bastion of democracy against so-called Islamofascism has a lot of traction still. So I think there's a lot of information here through intervention in the public domain that can challenge that.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
And yes, Ziyaad?
Inayet, I just managed to find this excerpt, if you may allow me just to read this
Yes,
out very quickly.
please go ahead, Ziyaad.
I think it's the crux of the Jewish movement. Okay. He writes here, Salman Abu Sita financing and apartheid Jewish national funds, violation of international and domestic law. Sita's detailed article challenges the assertion that under international law, ethnic cleansing, destruction of property, and depopulation of villages are war crimes. JNF has participated in these war crimes. All such actions are punishable. Remedy restitution must be made, as was the case in many cases during the Second World War and in Bosnia, Kosovo War. JNF actions must be viewed in this context, as war crimes have no statute of limitations, and it very briefly states and supports the Nuremberg, which defines war crimes as violations of or deportation to slave labor or for any others of civilian population or in occupied territory, murder or ill treatment of prisoners of war or persons on the seas, killing of hostages, plunder of public or private property, wanton destruction of cities, towns, or villages, or devastation not justified by military necessity. And I think that Nuremberg Charter nicely encapsulates the kind of case that we've put together in terms of terrorism, war crimes, crimes of aggression, and also the complicity of the Jewish National Fund in this larger process. Shukran.
Well, Ziyaad, shukran to you as well, also to Safoudien Bester and to Paul Hendler. We thank you. We do appreciate you taking time out. I know we've just basically scratched the surface. There's just so much more I suppose we can unpack, but I'm sure we've covered some of the key issues. This is a space we definitely will be watching. We definitely will be following developments a lot more closely from here onwards. But for now, we thank you. We appreciate your time, and please be safe. Take care. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Well, this was a probe that was launched in Cape Town this morning to look into South Africa enlisting South African citizens in the Israeli Defense Force, and this is called the South African Zionist Terrorism Corridor Probe, a comprehensive criminal docket. And from what you've heard, a lot of irrefutable, sustainable evidence that has basically come to light. This is an issue we definitely will follow. The time is just gone, 5 minutes past 8 p.m. We're going to go for a break. And when we come back, we are going to be paying a tribute to someone who has been a giant in South Africa in scholarly circles as well. And we are talking about paying tribute to the late Sheikh Abdul Hamid Khabir, who said he had passed away, rahimahumullah. And when we come back, we'll be joined by Imam Moti Saban from the Muslim Judicial Council. We also will be talking with Professor Farid Esak and also Judge Siraj Desai immediately after this. So stay with us. Don't go away. We'll be back.